Hey everyone, I already tried to film this once and I had to do a bunch of clips and stuff, and so I have some notes this time, so hopefully I can make it through in one big piece. But my name is Sam and I am doing my presentation on the third chapter of the book, which is just about like the key rules of economics and how the system works and how it is kind of tied in with society. And so before I started reading, I had some questions about who the author was. Shoemaker, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name correctly or not, but that's how I've been pronouncing it. And so I had some questions about who he was and what he studied and what he'd done for a profession. And so I looked some information up, just like Christina did, and I found out that he was a statistician and an economist, and he was actually the chief economic advisor for 20 years for the National Coal Board, the British National Coal Board. And so his ideas had a lot of influence across many countries, and his ideas are also very respected. And he brought in and made Buddhist economics more popular, which I'll talk about at the end because that's when he brings it in the chapter. But a brief overview is just he talks about the economic system, what types of goods there are and how we should use them, and how we should change the way we look at money. And so one of the first main things he talks about is how economists they don't control the economy, but they highly influence the economy and what goes on and what happens within it. And as time has gone on, society has become a lot more centered around the economy and the economic growth and performance and expansion. And rather than just having businesses and government and corporations be involved in the economy, society and just person to person has become a lot more involved with money and investments and things like that. And the next big main key idea is the difference between economic and uneconomic decisions. And he talks about how in reality an uneconomic decision is just a decision that fails to earn an adequate profit in terms of money. And so in reality it's just something that doesn't maximize profit to its total capacity. But society sees something as economic as like an illness that economists are supposed to kind of weed out and like fix, even if it's not something that's fixable, and even if it's not something that's necessarily bad, because just as something doesn't maximize profit doesn't make it a bad thing to do. And so he goes through a talk about how even though something might be uneconomic doesn't mean that it might be bad for society, and how one of the big key problems is how we're very centered around money, and money has the greatest value possible within our culture, and how we might need to change that. And he also goes into more detail on that later. And he talks more about how the common good is kind of treated the same throughout, even though all goods are completely different, and how economic decisions are very greatly influenced by short term, but they don't really take into account long-term situations. And he quotes Keynes, and he actually quoted Keynes a couple times throughout this chapter, but one of the most influential ones that he stated was how Keynes says that in the long term we're all dead, so none of our decisions really make a difference to us, but they make a difference to future generations. And the next big problem that he has with the short-term decisions being the only ones being made is that even though it's helping the economy, it's ruining the environment. And that is society's current thought process, is even though it is ruining the environment, it's helping the economy, so it doesn't really matter because we have growth. And even though it's bad growth, it's still growth. And he talks about that as well later, how quantitative growth and qualitative growth are two very different growth concepts. And right now, society is a very quantitative growth-based society where more production, more goods, more products, and the higher the number, the better off we are. And Shoemaker says that he actually disagrees with that, and he thinks that we should try and base our society as a qualitative society, which is a lot harder to define and a lot harder to track, because rather than tracking the quantity of goods that are produced, you track the quality of the goods that are produced, so you can use less machinery, higher quality products and goods, and you put more time and effort into it. And this is kind of going off of topic from the direction of the chapter, but one of the very key important aspects of what Shoemaker says throughout the whole chapter with his ideas is that we need to try and find more passion, and rather than just working for money and working to get physical assets, we need to work to enhance the soul and the brain and the mind, and we need to do things so that they have matter and meaning to humans and society. And he goes through and derives this from meta-economics and says that every economist should know about meta-economics, and that rather than just being a market-centered economy, when studying meta-economics is the study of man and the study of nature and combining them to try and make the best economic outcome in the long run. And he uses this to talk about how rather than keeping all goods in the same spectrum, he prefers to separate them into primary and secondary goods. And so in the chapter there's a little chart like this, and I wrote it out because it made more sense to me when I wrote it down and put some examples underneath. And so he has primary goods as resources, renewable resources and non-renewable resources, and then secondary goods are manufacturers and services. And so when we run out of our primary goods, he talks about how our secondary goods don't really matter because we can't make secondary goods without primary goods. And so circling back to quantitative production and trying to enhance the mind and the body and the soul and all of that, more philosophical things, it does branch back to the environment, because if we're making less numbers of things with higher quality, we'll be using better resources and less resources, and it wouldn't be as wasteful. And so that would make it, I'm losing my train of thought. Let me see. He talks about how everything is equated to something else, and rather than trying to give everything a price, we need to try and keep certain things priceless, because when you try to shove all goods, even free goods, which he describes as air, water, soil, goods that we don't see within the market, but that are used to create everything that we use basically, when you try to put a price on those things, it kind of just makes everything less important and just gives everything a price, and it doesn't make anything sacred or priceless. And that we need to try and degrade the value of money within our society to increase our thoughtfulness and the way that we look at the environment. And he talks about how with this just need to maximize profit and maximize production, all it's doing is taking away from the environment and our natural resources. And we're trying to take these resources and these goods that are very finite, and we're treating them like they're infinite. And although we may have infinite production, we don't have infinite goods and natural resources. And he says that if society keeps trying to keep this system that tries to create infinite amounts of goods and services from a finite amount of natural resources, that eventually we will run out of natural resources. And he also compares, or not really compares, but connects this to just the good of humanity, and how that humanity needs to try and focus back in on what's important to people and what's important to society and culture, and try to focus on those things, which is where the Buddhist economics comes in. And he doesn't really talk about this within the chapter, but he makes a note of it at the very end, and it intrigued me, so I went and I looked it up. And it was basically just that rather than measuring life by a standard of living and like comparing like cost and income and things like that, life is measured by fulfillment. And you don't take a job just to make money, but you take a job because it has meaning and it makes you feel whole in some way, and everything has an importance. And you do good work because it's essential. You don't do random work just because. And so that really intrigued me. And so I know throughout this presentation video I've been very rambly and lost my train of thought sometimes, but I hope that you guys got all the key points and all of my main ideas I was trying to get across. And when reading this, I thought of environmental deprivation and how we keep producing and we keep doing all these things and we keep causing damage, but we aren't stopping, and society knows these things are happening now, but they still aren't doing anything to stop it. And so if you guys, for part of this discussion, if you wanted to put down what you thought of when you read this chapter, or any of your thoughts that came into your head, or anything that I made you think of, that would be great, and I'll respond to anything that I'll respond to any questions. And thank you for sitting through a very rambly presentation.